In Europe, they did not appear until the early years of the 14th century. And in the course of time, many and unbelievable ramifications have set in. The tarot cards probably have a history separate from that of the ordinary gaming or amusement deck. The Count de Gavilan, one of the first great Egyptologists, favored the theory that these major trumps, as they are called, the 22 major cards of the tarot deck, which consisted of 78 cards, that these were actually based upon symbols used in the initiation rites of the ancient Egyptians. Some have held that they may have been carved upon the walls of the inner sanctuaries of the Egyptian mysteries. Others feel that they may have been freestanding symbols, originally in the form of objects of various shapes, sizes, and proportions, which were used in the instruction of those seeking admission into the sanctuaries. It is also possible, as suggested by Pythagorean lore, that these cards were originally used in a sacred oracular manner. The most permanent and enduring aspect of playing cards, except for gaming, has been the connection between them and oracles. The ancient priests of the tabernacle and the temples of Israel had auricular stones set upon the shoulders of their robes, by which they were able to determine the will of deity. More lately from this, the 12 stones of the breastplate of the high priest were believed to have miraculous powers. In other words, what man was always seeking was some way to discover the will of his deities. He really wanted to know what they wanted him to do. But unfortunately, the heavens were silent, and the only link between deity and the laity was the priesthood. The priests, in turn, composed largely of human beings with no extra spiritual powers or faculties, found it very difficult to make major decisions in the lives of people, either for the course of nations or for the fates of individuals. The priests were always consulted, and in almost every instance they ultimately fell back upon some type of oracle, some way of invoking deity, some way of bridging the interval between the objective and the spiritual causal universe within which we exist. The development of sacred magic related to these issues, and in many instances, as in the Oracle of Delphi, the discovery of the will of deity came through the priestess who served the oracle, who went into a kind of trance and delivered the mysterious quatrains or hexameter verses by which the deities were supposed to answer the questions of mortals. These questions involved many different problems relating to character, to decision, to career, to marriage, to death, and to destiny, as far as the major purposes of life were concerned. The philosopher Pythagoras was named for the Pythia of the Temple of Delphi. When the child was born, the seeress predicted his future and that which he would accomplish, and it was so. Thus, in a sense, the principle of fate was involved with all of the early uses of divinatory articles. If it is true that the Egyptian temples had within them certain magical figures, also the geometrical solids representing the deities, and systems of numbers by means of which oracles were delivered, we can then remember the wheel of Pythagoras, which, while it may or may not be authentic, is certainly ancient, and by which divination was performed through the combining of letters, particularly the letters of the name of the person asking the question. Always in that period of early study, men turned to the stars for guidance, and the belief of the influence of the planetary bodies upon human life was part of ancient philosophy and still survives under certain persecutions over which it appears to be always victorious. All these little symbols and different articles and different types of things probably led gradually to the production of some type of symbolic card. And one of the earliest names for the tarot cards was the Book of Thoth. Thoth was the Egyptian Hermes. He was the deity that had charge of the books of life. He was the one who spoke for the gods. He was the messenger of the deities. And it was said that he left behind him many books. And it is held by some that the Book of Thoth was really the playing cards, through the constant study and rearrangement of which patterns were created by which human beings could expand their understanding of themselves, their own lives, and the world in which they lived. Actually, then, for the origin of cards, we have 3 or 4 choices. One Chinese, one Egyptian, one Hindu, and one European. All of these have been explored, but they all fall back finally to the nature of man himself, and that wherever the human being has existed, he has developed some type of divination, some way of consulting the invisible and discovering, if possible, the will of the gods as it applied to the projects and purposes of his own career. In most countries, in practically all of the areas, the original use of cards was sacred. They were intended to be used as means of communicating with the powers of nature. Milton Pottinger, in one of his studies on symbolism, points out the parallels, for example, between the symbolisms on cards and the symbols of Freemasonry and other ancient esoteric societies. This has, however, certain disadvantages, because if we trace the cards down through the centuries, we find that the many irregularities have stepped in or crept in to change the appearances of the cards. It still remains true, however, that the King of Clubs is probably the Grand Master of the secret empire of the cards, for he is the only one who carries the orb, which was the symbol of ultimate royalty. But all the cards can be taken, and you can sit down and compare them. You can also, if you're interested, secure different cards from different makers and compare the details of symbolism. So there are so many different implications and applications to divination with cards that the only practical way is to read a good handbook on the subject, but always remember that the true decisions arise within yourself. Dependence upon psychic communication is fraught with many dangers, especially when this communication is not solutional to the major values of life. Many psychic revelations are so general or so optimistic that they present no useful contribution. It is only when a proper rapport is established that the individual knows what he needs. We all know what we want, but only the wise know what they need. And in the interpretation of the cards or the crystal or any other form, the superficial part of ourselves wants an answer that will supply us with what we desire. But the deeper part of ourselves is always searching for that which is the greater good, that which will assist us in developing and perfecting our own natures. So if you are given to card reading, if you are given to astrology, if you are given to any of these fields of mysticism, remember always that they are meditation centers by means of which it is hoped that you will explore the deeper part of yourself and find out what your needs really are. A horoscope is a psychological pattern. It is not only something to tell you whether you'll be rich or poor, it is something to point out the chemistry of your own consciousness. And if you are able to relax into the knowledge of yourself, you will constantly receive constructive guidance. But if you relax only into the knowledge of your desires and the fulfillment of your ambitions and appetites, you will get into trouble. But even in cases of this kind, the soul seems to operate more than we realize. The next point I'd like to bring out in connection with this is the problem of Mr. Kennedy's health. And here I think we have perhaps a situation that is a little more important or more to be considered than we have given attention to it. In my opinion, Mr. Kennedy is not a very healthy man physically. We hear occasionally of difficulties in his health. I suspect that these difficulties are rather real and perhaps will present a more or less definite situation. The president has certain dangers surrounding his administration, physical dangers. These dangers include his health, and where you have Saturn in the 10th house conjunct a planet like Neptune, you always have at least the remote danger of assassination. You have danger to life, you have danger to health, you have danger to public office in a great many ways. So the president's physical condition would, I think, justify a considerable amount of thoughtfulness and care.